The following is titled Statement Concerning the Treaty of Saginaw, 1819. I am not sure of the actual source from which this material was derived. However, I found it in a vintage copy of the Saginaw Treaty Sesquicentennial Historical Program from 1969. And it reads, ownership of more than 6 million acres of land and water changed hands in what was by far the most extensive real estate transaction ever concluded in Saginaw. Following the close of the War of 1812, there was a call for more Indian land to be opened for settlement. One would wonder why all the clamor for land when we consider that the Treaty of Detroit in 1807 had secured the 12 southeast counties of Michigan for the United States and, with the exception of the area near Detroit, very little of that territory had been settled by 1819. It is likely that land speculators were interested in acquiring low-priced land to be sold to settlers later at a very good profit. Regardless of the necessity for more Indian land, the government bowed to popular demand and commissioned Lewis Cass, territorial governor of the Territory of Michigan, which then included Wisconsin and that part of Minnesota east of the Mississippi River, to proceed to the Saginaw River and negotiate a treaty in which the Indians of that area would cede their lands to the U.S. and agree to remove west of the Mississippi River. As Cass prepared for the mission, he instructed Louis Campeau, resident fur trader of the Saginaw River, to construct a council hall. Campeau complied by clearing an area among the trees, placing poles between the lower branches, and covering the whole thing with boughs. This roof, while not rainproof, afforded shade. The ends and the sides were left open to allow observation by any interested persons. A raised platform of flattened logs was provided for the commissioner and his staff. Logs were moved into the treaty house to provide seating for the Indian leaders, primitive arrangement when compared with present-day conference halls, but appropriate for the era and the assemblage. 2 vessels loaded with supplies, gifts, and a company of soldiers, commanded by the brother of Commissioner Cass, sailed from Detroit to Saginaw. The commissioner and his staff of secretaries and interpreters came to Saginaw on horseback, following the Indian Trail from Pontiac to Saginaw via the Flint River Trail. 3 councils were held during the next 10 or 12 days, and at these meetings only the chiefs, headmen, and warriors were admitted to the council house. Since the sides were open, many of the several thousand Indians, chiefly Chippewas, present, including women and children, were able to see and hear the council proceedings. While they were silent listeners, they were more seriously involved than they realized, for they were about to lose their homes, their garden sites, their burial grounds, their forests, and everything that was dear to them. It is doubtful that any native realized how serious the results of the council would be for every red man within the treaty area, and no doubt many were apprehensive about it. At the close of the first day of council, at which no progress had been made, Cass retired to his quarters in the Campeau trading post, disappointed and anxious. The Indians returned to their wigwams, sullen and unappeased. The whites were few, the Indians were many. The military company was quite inadequate to resist a general outbreak had one occurred. In addition to Louis Campeau, the resident trader, there were present several other fur traders with goods to sell to the Indians after they received their silver from the government. One of the traders, Jacob Smith, had been trading with the Flint and Saginaw River Indians before and after the War of 1812, and during his long association with the Indians, he had adopted their way of living and was trusted and respected by them. Following the first council and several days of efforts by the government agents, not a step of progress had been made to change the Indians' minds concerning the treaty offer until several agents assumed the authority to promise the Indians that in addition to a number of tribal reservations, there would be reserved, as requested by Trader Smith, 11 sections of land to be located near the Grand Traverse of the Flint River, these reserves to be for persons with Indian names chosen by Smith. It seems that Smith was obligated to these 11 persons of the Flint area, where he had his trading post, which was not within the treaty area, and after being assured that the agreement he proposed would be included in the treaty, he used his influence to persuade the Indians to agree to the Cass proposition. A second council, held a few days later, was well attended by the chiefs and warriors. Their attitude had changed. A calm and open discussion ensued, and what was considered to be a just and honorable treaty was concluded. Removal of the Chippewas to the west of the Mississippi River had been sought by our government as one of the conditions of the treaty, and soon after the arrival, Commissioner Cass realized that it would be impossible to carry out this part of his instructions. This country was so well adapted to their way of life that they would not listen to any proposition about removal. On September 24, 1819, a third council was held, mainly to affix the signatures of General Cass and the witnesses, as well as to have the clerks inscribe the names of chiefs and headmen of the Chippewas and Ottawas onto the document. It is well to state here that some accounts of the Saginaw Treaty refer to the chiefs' totems, and on some treaties totems or symbols were used, but a photographic copy of the Indians' copy, on which the names were written by a clerk, shows no totem and only one X, which may have been placed there by an Indian. This copy also shows that the spelling used was Saginaw, S-A-G-I-N-A-W, while on the first plat of the town in 1822, the spelling used was Saginaw, S-A-G-A-N-A. As late as 1850, a postmark spelling is Saginaw, the S-A-G-A-N-A-W, and by checking early French, English, and Dutch maps of the Great Lakes region, we note a score of more spellings that were variations for Saginaw. It is quite proper to mention that as late as 1853, a number of Chippewas still came to Saginaw to receive the meager annuities due to them under the treaty conditions. This information was given by a pioneer who came to Saginaw as a young girl in 1852. She said some of the Indian men rolled up in blankets and slept on the floor of the Webster House, where she was employed. This hotel was located at the northwest corner of Michigan Avenue and Cleveland Street in Saginaw. She also said that during Indian payment days, most white residents refrained from shopping in Saginaw stores, not because of any fear of the Indians, but because many merchants raised their prices while the red men had silver. For example, she said a $3 blanket would be priced at $7. It would seem that with government payments being as small as they were, a little honesty on the part of the merchants would have been in order. But when the Indian silver was spent, they returned to their forest homes and local prices returned to normal. We realize today that a country with the potential to support 200 million humans and assist other millions on a worldwide basis, as the United States now does, could not have been left to exclusive use by a few million people in an undeveloped condition. As we see it today, the need for development and full use of the natural resources of the country was greater than anyone of the 1819 era could have comprehended. But while few will deny the need for development, certainly the original occupants of the land were entitled to more consideration than they received. After several generations, many Chippewas' descendants are, as we would say, doing very well and simply living an average life. But in some parts of the country, where the Indians live on reservations, life is very hard, to say the least. To get back to the Treaty of Saginaw, Commissioner Cass, through an interpreter, opened the council at 10 a.m. on the day after he arrived by stating that the Great Father in Washington was interested in the Indians' welfare and explaining how much better a life of agriculture would be. He also sounded the warning that civilization must advance and promised blankets, silver beads, and guns, as well as instructions in agriculture and the needed tools and animals. It was not reasonable to expect a hunting and gathering people to turn to farming in a short time. Today, some Indians are indeed successful farmers, but they are in the minority. As flowery as the commissioner's speech may have been, the outstanding and, to the Indians, most serious part was that the United States desired to obtain their land and move them away from it. The chief speaker for the Indians opposed the proposition. In fact, he was indignant about it. Part of his answer was, "You do not know our wishes. We are here to smoke the pipe of peace with you, but not to sell our lands. You want our homes. Our English friends do not ask for them. Your people trespass our hunting grounds. You flock to our shores. The warm wave of the white man rolls in and melts us away. Our women reproach us. Our children need homes. Shall we sell the spot where they would spread their blankets? We have not called to you here. We will smoke the pipe of peace with you, but we will not sell our lands. Cass replied by reproving the speaker for arrogant assumption and reminding the Indians that the United States had only recently beaten their English father and the Indians who were allied with him in the War of 1812, that by the rules of war their land was forfeited but the United States did not propose to take it without proper payment. That tribal land would be reserved for them to live on, and that they would be aided and instructed in agriculture. One Indian leader, Kishkako, the Crow, also opposed Cass and his plan. He was an Indian of violent temper at best, and when under the influence of liquor was reckless in the commission of outrage. After many acts of violence against his own people and whites, he died in a Detroit prison. He was more dangerous and obnoxious if slightly intoxicated and at the council meeting than when completely drunk in his own wigwam. It seems that he kept himself in the latter condition for the balance of the negotiations. In plain language, a few gallons of whiskey kept him away from the council meetings. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed. Please be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe. I will not be presenting the actual total text of the Treaty of Saginaw, as that would be very boring listening, but shortly I will be presenting another video here that covers other details of the Treaty of Saginaw and the negotiations of that. Alright, thanks for stopping by. God bless, and have a great night.